Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another fine episode of Why Bother with your host, John Szablewski, the podcast that didn't need to be made by the host who really didn't want to make it. Today, I am joined by Connie Hanel, a college professor, an entrepreneur, a car mechanic, a handy woman. She's got a list of things that she can do that spans from here to the moon and back. So without further ado, I am very excited to introduce my guest today, Connie Hanel. Hi, Connie. How's it going today?
It's going great, John. How are you?
I am great. I thought that when I was thinking about an intro for you
Yes.
and looking at your resume and your list of things that you are able to do, that how would I ever be able to just consolidate that? So I just named it all. So I hope that's enough.
That it's more than enough, John. More than enough.
So Connie, usually on this show, I bring people in that I know. Obviously,
Right.
I know you, and we have a connection that most of my guests don't have, and I would hope that all my guests except you don't have, because that would be a little weird.
It would be very weird, John. It would be very weird. Yes.
And that is that I am currently dating your daughter.
Right.
So,
Yeah. The other problem with that, John, is if there were more people, then what would that say about my daughter?
or me. So
Well, yeah. So I think we ought to just move on from that portion of how we know each other, huh?
yes. Yeah, so Connie, I've known you for about 3 years now. In that time, I've learned an awful lot about you in your past, how you've come to where you are today, and the maybe the careers that you've had. A few years ago, probably back in like 2010, I remember there being that statistic that most people will change careers 5 times or more in their lifetime. And I think, and maybe you could talk a little bit about this as you're introducing yourself, is I think that number 5 may be too low. I think people are doing this a lot more frequently than what we think. So why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit? Start out wherever you feel comfortable, and we'll take it from there.
Well, I think you already did introduce me, right? So my name is Connie Hanel, and I do know John, and he makes me sound a lot more exciting than I actually am, talking about all the different things that I do. My passion is very diverse, but my main passion is really education and learning and working with people and helping them to be more empowered to understand how they can move forward and learn things. Because I think in this society and the way things have changed, a lot of people struggle and they think that that means that there's something kind of wrong with themselves, and it really isn't. It's a lack of understanding about how you learn and how you move forward. And I worry about people because when they aren't successful in a learning environment, sometimes it rolls over into other things. And that could be somewhat like we were talking about careers. And you talk about all my different careers. Those things kind of led me to this place now, to doing the work that I'm doing now. When you talk about 5 careers, when I was younger, that was totally not the number. People found a job and got with that job and stayed with it till they died or
Yeah,
retired.
yeah.
And my jobs are varied, and mine were just a matter of survival. Sometimes it's people climbing the corporate ladder. I know I teach a career counseling class, and so sometimes it's people climbing a corporate ladder.
Mhm.
But other times, in my case, it's a matter of survival, right? The economy is changing, jobs come and go, jobs are available, jobs aren't available. You want to keep working, you want to be able to pay your bills, so you have to reinvent yourself.
Mhm.
And I think that that's what I've had to do over the years, is consistently reinvent myself.
Sure. And you bring up a really good point, reinventing yourself, because I think that the more skills, more interests, and more things that people enjoy doing will allow for them to find those careers or those jobs when times are tough.
That's
Uh,
right.
I mean, I have friends who have for 35, 40 years did one thing, like you were
Right.
saying. My grandfather, my other grandparents, they got their job 30 years, they put it in, they retired, they had a pension, they moved on, they were done. They would never have dreamt of working somewhere for maybe 3, 4 years and then saying, you know what, this isn't working. Maybe I got to find something else, or
Right.
maybe, God forbid you're let go from a job and you need to just, you know, find something that's going to help your family.
Right.
And it's just fascinating. So I think that you brought up a good point. I don't know if anybody is going to be doing the same job for 30 years anymore. I don't know if that's.
It's hard. It's a hard thing. And particularly now when you look at the coronavirus, right?
Mhm.
We've all been doing our jobs. And now those people who were doing really well and those people who were doing average, the virus has maybe eliminated those people's positions who have done really well or put them on a pause. And the pause has been so long that now the people who were doing are
Mm.
actually doing much better than the people who were, and so there's this imbalance. So how long do you leave yourself in a holding pattern,
Yeah.
waiting for the next opportunity, or do you go out and try to do something else? And what happens? And so for me, a big part of a lot of my career changes was when the banks all went kind of up and the real estate market crashed and funding went away, and I was working for a nonprofit. I mean, and so jobs just started disappearing in
Mhm.
the area that I was in. So it was like, all right, what's next? This isn't going to change, and I can't sit back and wait for it to change, right? Because I still gotta. I
Yeah.
like to eat, so I
Well,
still gotta eat.
that seems to be a growing concern for most people. How do you eat if you don't have
Have
something giving you income, right?
right? Yes. Yeah.
So,
I mean, we're laughing, but it's not funny,
it's
right?
not funny at
It's
all.
not
It's,
funny
it's
at
not
all.
funny at all. I mean, and luckily throughout coronavirus, and it's still happening. It's it. You and I were both lucky, and our families were lucky that we still had income because as education we went to virtual teaching, right? So
Right.
so that was definitely a learning curve, but I think that when you're an educator, there you need to have that flexibility, and I think that throughout our path, because you and I share similar trajectories. I think in restaurant experience, management experience, different levels of that, working with people, working in industries that may have been that were downsized just because of what
Right.
they did, right? And then having to recreate yourself. So I'm going to share a little bit of my past, and I think that you'll uh, understand this, and you probably know it. So it was 2016. I was working for a newspaper, and that's the end of that story. Newspaper
Right.
disappeared, right? It just
Right.
was
Right.
gone, and it was at that moment that I said, I need that change. I need to figure something out. And I remember one of the big things being, I want a pension and I want to be able to retire one day.
Right.
And I never thought teaching would have been what I was going to end up in. Right. But helping people and instilling that excitement of education and learning, I found to be fascinating. And that's how I got to where I am. And
Right.
I would think, based on what you were just talking about, is helping people make those choices, that that's how you got to where you are right now.
Never in a million years would I have thought that this is where I would have ended up. This is not who I thought I'd be. And sometimes I think, I wish I would have started this sooner
Mm-hmm.
because I really love where I'm at now. But I also realize that everything that I experienced is what drove me to this direction to where I am today. So, although it would have been great if I figured it out sooner, I'm not sure then I was ready for something like that. And you said something that made me think of what one of the things that I teach in this career course, which is luck. There's this
Mm-hmm.
notion of luck, and when you're looking for a job, why are some people lucky and why are some people unlucky? And luck is really something that you create. And I look at you, and that's one of the things that I admire about you, right? Because you're open-minded to things. You're open to things that come your way. You're willing to try it. And so I think luck is when you put yourself out there, you consistently market yourself, but you're open to trying different things. And through that, you may find a path or a passion of something you didn't expect. And that's what, me here teaching now is
Mm-hmm.
being my primary income. I would have never have guessed that would have been the path I would have taken, but I was open
Mm-hmm.
to opportunities and things that came before me. And as I grew and learned different things, yeah, I tried them, and that's how I ended up here. And I think that's why you're so multifaceted and multi-talented as well, because, you are open to that and willing to try things that interest you and
Well,
learn more about them.
well, thank you, I appreciate that. But and the check is in the mail for those comments. So
Yeah, I know.
thank
That's
you very much. So but yeah, I think that's great. So you talk a little bit about luck, and you have this career class, and back in probably the early '50s and '60s. When the height of like the machine assembly line, and we had labor jobs, and people would get a job working for General Motors that could feed an entire family of 4, 5, maybe 6 people on one
right,
income. So you have this industry booming, and this is a labor that was set, and you would have that job for 30 years.
right.
So
Can I
no,
just clarify one thing?
sure,
I
please.
I wasn't alive then. That's all I
Yeah.
want to just say, because you're asking me like I might have that experience. So okay, keep going, John. Just want to make sure everyone knows I was not alive in the 50s.
So, well, that's a good clarification.
Okay, keep going, John.
So now I've lost my train. Oh, so we talk about that, and you got a job. This notion of doing what you love was not necessarily
Not important.
not important at all. My grandparents, when I told my grandmother that I wanted to go to film school, she said, "For what?"
Yeah.
like I mean, and in my family, you had to go to college. It didn't matter what you did. I wanted to go to film school. For what?
Right. Right.
So how has it changed in your curriculum with career placement and discovery for students? How do we find that doing what you love and being able to make a life for yourself when that way of thinking is so new to the world?
Oh, well, John, I don't think there's enough time in this program to dissect that. But one of the things that I help people look at when through my background in counseling is that if you kind of look at a line, and you think of the beginning of the line being not where you want to be, the center of the line being almost where you want to be, and the end of the line being exactly where you want to be. And sometimes in a career, your career might be almost exactly where you want to be, but your income is not anywhere close to where you want to be, right? So you have job satisfaction, but you don't have income satisfaction. And then you can reverse that and have income satisfaction, but you don't have career or job satisfaction, right? So it's trying to find a way to get those things to go together and to be balanced. And sometimes you have to start out with not liking your pay and liking your job, or the other way around, until you can work your way through the system to find the place that you want to be. But ultimately, I think all of us want to do something that we love every day. However, we still sometimes have to be like our grandparents and our great grandparents. We have to do things we don't want to do, and we have to do things at work, and sometimes we have to take jobs. And there are a lot of jobs that I took that I learned from and I grew, but they weren't necessarily a forever job, as some people will call them, right? They were a stepping stone job, and they were a way to pay my bills and make the next step and build a resume. So I think that's a really tricky thing, because we expect people to come out of high school, know what they want, do it, and go on and never change. And if you don't mind me saying this, I think my daughter actually said this to me, because she went to school for music education, 100% convinced that's what she was going to do. Yeah. People in our family told her why, because at the time there were really no jobs. Like, why? And she's like, this is what I'm passionate. By the time she finished her 4-year degree, there were lots of jobs, right?
There were, yeah.
but she didn't take a job in music education. She came to me and she goes, "I'm sorry I've disappointed you." I said, "You didn't disappoint me. What are you talking about?" She said, "Well, I went to school. It's like I wasted it because I didn't do what I went to school for." I said, "Absolutely not. You go to school to learn and grow and discover and figure out who you are, right?
Yes.
And if in that path you figure out that's not really your passion, but it's still opened the doors for you to go and do things, then you have you've reached your goal of education." Right. And
Yes.
I think that's a mistake people make. They think that, okay, I've committed to this and now I'm stuck.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a really good point too, because it's one of those situations where we're seeing in society now more and more that the college system isn't for everybody, right? And
Right.
we have the opportunity for trade school, and you can still further your education in different avenues. You know, the liberal arts diploma isn't the make or break thing. And
Right.
and you can, I mean, I know plumbers and electricians and craft carpenters that make six figures a year
Absolutely.
doing exactly what they love to do because they like working with their hands. And I don't know anybody who did not ever need a plumber on a Sunday night at like it's like Christmas Eve
Right.
or like, golden time, right? It's something that I think that is interesting. And I think that doing what you love could be, or doesn't necessarily have to always be, molded into this thing that society has made it.
Yeah, but I think that that's actually what you just said is kind of a great testament to what's going on right now. Everybody's kind of arguing and fighting, and there's all these tensions because people are battling with their beliefs, right?
Yeah.
And my beliefs are right and your beliefs are wrong. And it's the same it's not the same thing. I'm not trying to minimize, but I'm saying when you talk about careers, someone will look at Madison and say, "Well, you're going to be a music teacher?" When my father graduated with his PhD, he was a psychologist, and somebody said to him, "Boy, all that work and you could have been a real doctor." Right? It's like, so as a society, we value different things, but trades
Mm-hmm.
can make as much or more money than a doctor.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So, and each one has equal value in our society. We need them all. If I need my appendix out, I hope there's a doctor. And if my lights aren't working, I hope there's an electrician who will come to my house and fix it because I don't know how to do that, right?
Exactly. Or maybe it's the same person who just does like the appendix
No.
on the side.
No.
So,
No.
but so I think that this is an interesting topic, and you did say that there's not enough time in this program to dissect it, but I think we got the conversation there rolling. So I want to talk a little bit about restaurant management, because I think that restaurant management or working in food service or retail or whatever is something that every person should have to do for at least a week in their life. I don't care if it's working at the front counter of a fast food establishment, 1 week, because I think it would make everybody a better human being.
Okay, the fact that you said 1 week, I can get on board. If you said more than that, I don't think people understand how hard. First of all, I don't think people understand how hard it is to be your own owner. I think when people think that you own your own business, you have the ability to come and go as you please, and you make the rules and no one's your boss, which couldn't be farther than the truth. And when you work in the restaurant business, that is such a difficult business. And for a couple of years in there, when I was working on my master's, I did business consulting for startup businesses or people who were in business, and went in and did some consulting work to help them. And the first thing I would say when people would come to me and say, "I want to start a business and it's food, it's restaurant," I'd say, "Pick a different business." Because it's a really, really, really hard business. Your product is perishable. It has to be handled in a particular way. It's very easy for it not to be produced the same way. And the people that you're relying on is a large staff of people. There's so many different sections. There's rules and regulations, and it's a hard business, even for the people who are working in it, the servers and that. It's a hard business. If you get it right and you can survive past 5 years, then you're most likely on the road to having a successful business. But that first 5 years, some people would come to me and say, "I'm going to open up a business, but I'm not going to be in it." I'm like, then don't open it, because if you're not committed to it as your life for 5 years, unless you have exponential cash to pay somebody to come in and actually run that business for you, you're not going to be successful, because people need to see that the person running the ship is just as committed. And if they're not committed, I'm not going to work that hard for you. So it's a tough business. There were a lot of things I loved about running a business. My customers were the bomb. They were great. I loved them coming in. They were consistent. We talked about their life. We shared events. That's the number one thing that I miss about not being in business anymore for myself, is in regards to restaurant work,
Yeah.
And the food. If you didn't catch that earlier, I like food. So that part too.
Food is the thing. It is, like, and I know we've had this conversation, but like, for me personally, I don't have any vices. I really don't. There are people that turn to like substance issues. I don't have any of that. I like to eat, and it's unfair that there's such a repercussion in weight gain for enjoying to eat.
And a nice drink. Would be good too.
A nice drink to eat. So restaurant and networking. So it doesn't matter if you're a door-to-door salesperson or if you're working. It's all about networking. So it's probably even more important for somebody who's working for their own business, like you were, to be there, because people know you. They know that if something comes up and they need an order filled, maybe I could call Connie. I talk to her all the time, and you're probably more than happy to go a little above and beyond if they've been somebody that you've gotten to know, right?
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about what your business was that you ran?
Yeah, so the first business that I ran was an ice cream and candy store, and it was called Sweet Memories. And the reason why it was called Sweet Memories was because my grandparents, who immigrated here from Greece, had candy stores. So Garden of Sweets, Elko Bar, Condrell's Candies, and then some of our close family friends, Antoinette Sweets, Alethia's, which hopefully some people have heard of these. And I just remember growing up in this candy store and how amazing it was, and helping. And back then things weren't automated. They were a bunch of women, typically women, sitting in the back room, and they were chocolate dippers, and they would literally have a huge vat of chocolate and a marble slab in front of them, and whatever it was that needed to be covered, caramels, clusters, creams, in the vat it went, out on a tray with a little decoration on the top to tell you what it was, on a tray, cooling correctly, and then they went on to the next. And that's what I grew up with, right? Homemade toppings. And so I always wanted to get back to that. I always wanted to be able to do that. So my husband and I ventured into East Aurora and picked up a business and changed its name to Sweet Memories, because it was based on the memories that I had as a childhood and of these stores and these locations. First one was on Bailey Avenue in Buffalo, and started to recreate that the best we could in a modern kind of time, right? Sure. And my grandfather gave me it was really kind of amazing. He handed over this metal recipe card index box, right? And he gave them to me, and in there were all of his recipes. Very few of them actually said the amounts, right? Had details, but at one point he made his daughter, my Aunt Marianne, and type up all of the recipes that had been handwritten. And one of the things he was famous for was his hot fudge. And I remember that I wanted to learn how to make this hot fudge. I had the recipe, I got all the ingredients together, and I asked him to explain it to me. And he said that I could not make it because I didn't have a copper pot. because candy makers use copper pots because copper pots are the best for equal heat distribution and control.
Uh-huh.
So I said, okay, I'm going to go buy a copper pot. Well, copper pots are really expensive, and I was just starting out.
Yeah.
Couldn't afford it. So I went out and I bought this big pot, and it was not as much money. And I made the hot fudge, and I put some in a jar, and I sent it to his house, and I got a phone call, and my grandfather says, "You bought a copper pot." And I'm like, "No, I didn't." And he's like, "Then you must be some kind of a miracle woman because this tastes just like my hot fudge. And the only way to make it work is in a copper pot." Right. And I'm like, so he's like, "I need to come out." So the next day he had somebody drive him out to the store because he wanted to see how I did it because he didn't believe me that it could be done. And so that was, and then we just started making that hot fudge nonstop, and it was great. It's one of the things I miss about not having the business.
The hot fudge, well, of course, because
yes,
you could put that on a flip flop and it would taste good, I mean, oh my god.
Well, I frequently did just scoop it up in a spoon. And one of the benefits of owning a candy store is people are like, "Don't you get sick of it?" I said, "No, you just rotate, right? I'll eat caramels this week, creams next week. I'll eat sponge candy the week after that. I can have milkshakes, hot fudge sundaes. Just keep changing it up. I'm not going to get sick of this stuff."
So earlier in that thing, your story, you were talking about how usually women worked on hand making the candies.
Right.
How did you, or how is it designed? I don't know. When you put like the little design on the top to know that it's a caramel or it's a chocolate covered cherry or it's a jelly or whatever, is that just something inside that particular store that's what they know that is, or is that something that's passed on for all candy making, like no matter where you went?
That's a great question. And I don't actually know the answer to that question. I think that in some ways, because if you look at some boxes, they have codes. And so I think there's some universal symbols, but I think that there are some that places do themselves. They really don't do hand dipping anymore because people who are hand dippers, there's something called tempering chocolate. And that is when you melt chocolate, real chocolate. And you bring it back to room temperature. You have to temper it. It's the way that you bring it back to a solid form. And I guess the best way to talk about it would be like a puzzle, right? And so when you take a puzzle apart, the puzzle needs to go back together and the pieces need to fit together the same. Well, if you don't bring it back to room temperature again, it's like cutting pieces of the puzzle off and it won't come together right. And that's when you get candy that has that sort of gray look to it or speckly look to it. It means that it's untempered chocolate and somehow, somewhere it melted and did not come back to room temperature appropriately. So now they have these things called enrobers, where they're huge in length, and you put the we'll call it naked candy, whatever it is you're covering, sponge, right? Caramels in the beginning, and it kind of goes over a little conveyor belt that puts chocolate on the bottom, and then it goes over a waterfall of chocolate. And there's a space about this big before it goes in a tunnel to be cooled. And a person stands in the middle, and that's where they do the marking of the chocolate. And then at the other end of the candy, out comes the candy. And everyone knows the I Love Lucy, right?
I was just thinking this while you were mentioning it. Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly what that is. It technically, when those are coming out there, those are coming out of the end of an enrober, and people are down there and they're supposed to box them. Yeah, they don't come out that fast. They don't come out that fast. But it made for good comedy. It is one of my favorite things to watch.
Oh yeah, and what I love about candy businesses, because that's first of all, that's a very localized thing, right? Because you have your neighborhood in Buffalo and in the suburbs and everything around. You had your candy stores in your neighborhood, and that's who you would go to, right? It was probably very rare for somebody who lived in East Aurora to drive down to the east side of Buffalo for the candy, unless they did something there that was so out of the norm.
Well, people will drive now, but yeah, it's probably like florists, right? My parents had a florist shop, and that's the shop we all used. And when we grew up, that's now you go online and there's very little loyalty to any of that.
It is. And I think that, neighborhoods don't really have that same camaraderie anymore because you got the internet. You can go anywhere. I could call 1-800-Flowers and have a bouquet. I don't know where it comes from, but I can have it shipped to my house overnight for some ridiculous amount of money. And it's bizarre. But candy. So now let's talk a little bit about sponge candy.
Yes.
All right. Now, sponge candy is a Buffalo staple, and it's. I just learned this fact about sponge candy probably in the last 2 or 3 years, that there is a huge amount of waste that's involved in it in order to get that good sponge that we like. Now, is that the truth?
Well, I mean, there is some waste that goes into it, and I probably should have had some pictures prepared for you so you could see what that sponge making process is like, because it's pretty. It's why sponge candy, first of all, is so expensive. It is because it weighs almost nothing. And it's very labor intensive. And so chocolate is sold by the pound. And so if you sold it by the average pound, for the amount of labor and time and the ingredients that went into it, it wouldn't make any sense. So sponge candy, what happens is it's really like corn syrup and sugar and gelatin mix and baking soda, and it's heating it at a very high heat, and it's beating it, and it takes time, and it's tough on the shoulders. And then you have these giant marble slabs, right? And the reason why marble's used so much in candy making is that it maintains it's cool, and so it draws the heat out of things, right? So then these custom molds are made. They're usually these big square giant molds, and it takes 2 people to pick up a copper pot. You pour it into this giant mold, and then the stuff just rises, gets really tall and rises, and you leave it alone, and when it's set, you take the mold off of it. Well, everything on all the edges, all the outside exposure is hard. It's really hard as a rock. You could probably suck on it like a hard candy. So they literally use saws that you would use to cut wood, right? Except we only use it for the sponge candy. And the huge brick is cut into 4 sections, and then you trim off all of the hard candy off the edges, and you're left with that foamy core inside. And then you use the saw to saw that into the smaller pieces that go into sealed containers so that the air, because it's really essentially just sugar. That's why when you put it on your tongue, it just dissolves.
Yeah.
And then it's the chocolate that coats it that prevents it from breaking down. So sometimes sponge candy will have more chocolate on it. And it used to be only made in the wintertime because chocolate factories or mom and pop places, they weren't air conditioned, and you couldn't control it. And the humidity could compromise the sponge, and then someone would get sponge and it would be bad, and they would think you made a bad product. So the candy makers used to only make that available in the winter when there was no humidity, and they could control the quality of the sponge candy.
That is fascinating, that the art form of candy making, which is there's very few that I know of local candy stores left. I know there's a couple in South Buffalo, and I'm sure they're sprinkled out around the area, but it's just fascinating that there was so much time and effort put into it, and that was a labor of love. You loved your business. And you were saying earlier about how when you would consult, if for new businesses opening up, if the owner didn't want to be involved, it wasn't going to succeed. And right. I can't imagine a candy store existing where the owner wasn't working there 7 days a week for 8 to 10, 15-hour days, whatever it was, making sure their product was there because it's their name that was probably on the box.
Well, I never met anyone who wanted to do a candy business who didn't want to be 100% involved. So mostly it was people who were looking at running restaurants or say just ice cream shops, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you talk about not having loyalty necessarily or driving far for candy or neighborhood areas. I think that's the part of the business, which is the ice cream store, that creates that loyalty, because everyone has a local ice cream store that they like and that they'll go into.
Mm-hmm.
And also the candy and the ice cream sort of support itself, because ice cream is very popular in the summer but
Mm-hmm.
not in the winter. And candy is very popular in the winter because that's gift giving times. That's when you hostess gifts. It's Easter. It's Valentine's. Those types of things. I mean, Easter used to be a make or break holiday. We have a lot of these amazing metal molds, and this is something that is a testament to the way business used to be.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing metal molds, right? Now they're all plastic, but they were expensive. So what the candy makers in Buffalo used to do is they shared their molds because they couldn't afford to have all the molds for Easter.
Mm-hmm.
So they would have stamped on the mold the name of the family. And then what would happen is I would make my candy, and then I would give my molds to you, and you would give your molds to me, and your name would be stamped on them so that I knew to give them back to you, right? And they
Yeah.
would rotate like that so that we could all have a nice assortment of Easter candies and molds to give. I mean, that's really when the biggest time was for the molds that they were made, was during Easter. Yeah, and now we're really kind of cutthroat and but there's still some places around like Alethia's
Mm-hmm.
and Antoinette's. And Condrell's Candies, it's now called King's Condrell's. Richie King, he and his wife run that, and they still make candies in their backyard. And
Mm-hmm.
oddly enough, my mother's side of the family, which is Palakis from Erie, Pennsylvania,
Mm-hmm.
they had a candy place too called. I used to joke that my parents met at a candy convention, but it really was. It really was because they were both Greek. But they had a place called Palakis Candies, and they used to be candy teachers. And people from all over the United States would come to their school in Erie, Pennsylvania, and learn how to make candies.
Mm-hmm.
And that was pretty amazing, too. So that's where that passion came from, to be a candy maker.
Sure. I remember being in home and careers class in 7th grade, and the Valentine's Day candy sale was big, and it was our job in home and careers to work with our teacher, Mrs. Kalenic, and we had to make the candy. And she had a big copper double boiler, and she'd plug it in at 7 a.m. She'd get there early. We had the little chocolate wafers, and she would melt those. And my job, I kid you not, was the giant Hershey Kiss in the plastic mold, and I'd have to scoop it in, put it in, and then I'd have to drop it to get the air out. And then she had all the refrigerators in the classroom cranked up to freezers, and we would set the candy in there for it to set.
Right.
But then I was promoted from that department very quickly into the sponge candy bagging division of the of the Valentine's Day candy sale. And I remember 3 ounces. We would put 3 ounces of sponge candy into this bag, and I would have to put it into the sealer, right?
Yep.
And sometimes
you even had a sealer. Very impressive.
We had a sealer. We were quite the assembly line.
Yeah.
And I just remember one time the scale was off, and they never showed me how to tear the scale to get it back.
Right.
So I had this one bag of sponge candy it was a hefty bag, and I was like, this is amazing how much you're getting in 3 ounces. And the next bag, there's like 2 pieces in it, and that was 3 ounces.
John.
So
I was about to say, I wish I knew you when I had the candy store so you could have helped me. And now you told me that story, and I'm glad you didn't help me.
Let's just say I did a lot. Well, that was the same teacher that taught me how to use the seam ripper in sewing, and I use that an awful lot. So I've learned that I'm quite the implementer. I like to get things done quickly. But I'm not really the developer where I slow it down and think it through.
Got it.
So let's talk a little bit about home improvement projects. Now, knowing you, you have tackled many different projects, woodworking, redoing bathrooms, putting up walls, putting in decks, all kinds of great things. Where did your interest in working on home and career, not home and career, I'm serious, home improvement projects come from?
Right.
And what would that mean to other people to learn how to do this kind of stuff? How is that a skill that they can utilize
Right.
in their day-to-day life?
Well, first of all, I'm cheap, right? And so I want to get things done, and so sometimes it's expensive to get things done if you want to get them done right. But I think the biggest thing is, and I think this started back with my interest in business and watching my family develop business. They go into a space that was nondescript, and they would fill it up and they would do things to it, and it would transform, and it would be like a magical place, like a candy store or something like that.
Yeah.
And then my parents introduced me to these amazing people, Rick and Paula Hainstetter. And as I knew them, they kind of would buy their first home that they got was an old family home that came to them in the city of Buffalo that really needed to be redone. And they were nice enough to take me as a young girl into the home. And I'm saying they were nice, but really maybe they were using me as cheap labor here. But I would go in and they would teach me things, and we would strip the woodworks, and I would watch them do tiling. But to make a really long story short, Rick just said to me, there's almost anything you can do. He said start with something that has a high fudge factor. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, well, if you're going to do home improvement, pick with something that if you make a mistake, the house isn't going to collapse. It's just an aesthetic thing.
Yeah.
And then no one will really know it's there unless you point it out to them. Yeah. Right. And so the first thing he did was teach me how to wallpaper. And then I was in an apartment, and it was 90 degrees in the summer and no air conditioning. And he said, put a ceiling fan in. I'm like, I don't know how to do that. So he went out to Home Depot and he bought me this book about how to do things. And he came over and he was good because instead of just doing them, he made me do it. So, I slowly realized that electricity isn't that scary. It's pretty simple. Yeah. You can change things out. And I learned how to do that. And then a lot was working side by side with him, Mm-hmm. So when we moved into the house we're in now, I wanted to gut the kitchen. So I'm like, I never hung cabinets. Can you help me? He's like, sure. So I got the kitchen, and he teaches me how to hang cabinets, and we hang the cabinets, and then we get to the tiling. But he had taught me how to do tiling when I was like 18 years old. Mm-hmm. So I did, and so I think a lot of these things are scary, but places like Home Depot and Lowe's, they have stuff like that all the time. And then just recently I put a deck on the back. It's great because a $300 deck in material in my time could have been an $800 or $1,000 deck if someone else put it on for me, right?
Sure.
So I look at it as I get to stand back and feel good about what I did. Mm-hmm. I get to be physical so I can justify the cupcakes and the milkshakes and the hot fudge sundaes I'm going to eat.
Of course.
And I can see that I did something, right? And then I get to sit on it and feel proud about it, right? And so I get a lot of pleasure from taking something, and I think that's the entrepreneurial part, and watching it change into something different that's useful and aesthetically pleasing, and just makes me happy.
Yeah, and I think that there if you're going to be a homeowner, if you're going to, if you want to own property, you should have some basic idea on how to do simple things. And I think Rick saying choose something that has a low fudge factor. It's a
high fudge factor.
A high fudge factor, excuse me. A high fudge factor. Tying in with the candy store story about hot fudge.
Yes.
I think that really speaks a lot about it because, so what if you make a mistake? If you make it, you'll get over it. Then you can open up your wallet if you really don't like it and have somebody come do it for you.
Right.
But what did you lose? Some time. Right. There you go.
Well, you were just telling me you got to go replace your shower head, right? And if you didn't know what you were doing and you did it wrong, it means the first time you turn it on, water's going to squirt all over the place. Exactly. But then you shut the water off and you're fine.
Exactly.
So you have to not be afraid. Electricity can be a little different. It can be a little more intimidating because if you're not careful, you could really hurt yourself.
That's a low fudge factor.
That's a low fudge factor, right. And I started with things like wallpapering, which people don't even really do anymore, except for you recently, as you were tortured with wallpapering your hallway.
and you know what? I have to say that product, the paintable wallpaper, is the best thing and the worst thing all at once, because it doesn't cut like normal wallpaper because it's
so thick. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like when you take your sharp utility knife and you're trying to go like past the woodwork to cut it apart, it was running, and it was like, oh,
tears
and licking it and sticking it, but anyway. So,
but that's a high fudge factor, right? Because when you're done, you were able to do things to hide that it didn't cut clean, and then you painted over it. Now, when you stand back and look, unless you said, "See over here," no one's gonna know that. That's a high fudge factor to me.
Yeah, and you know what? I think too that, as educators, at least I say this to my kids all the time, there are mistakes that I give you the right to make right away. If you paint something wrong, that's great. So I think that people say there's no such thing as bad mistakes. I agree with to an extent. But then I think there's sometimes where it's like you took a paintbrush, you licked it, you put it in Sally's ear, and then you ran around the room and poked your eye out. That's a bad mistake. You probably shouldn't have done that.
Where did you come up with that?
I don't even know why I went down that rabbit hole, but so good mistakes are things that you can take from that and grow. Bad mistakes, you shouldn't have even been doing that in the first place. What were you thinking about?
Like sticking your finger in an electrical socket to see if it's live.
Yes.
That is a bad mistake, John. Okay.
And right now, like there are certain jobs that I would never try to do, like putting a roof on the house. No, it's just I'm writing it. Even though you can watch YouTube videos and you're like, wow, this is not a difficult thing. I just don't want to do it. So
my brother-in-law does that, right? So when we needed a roof, he taught us how to do that. So we actually did put a roof on our own house, but it was a very simple house. Like if you have lots of, I would never tackle that by myself. But it is very time consuming. And the other thing too is the older you get, the less inconvenienced you want to be with certain projects, and being up on a roof and maybe falling off is not my idea of fun like it was when I was in my 20s and was willing to get up on the roof and say, hey, I did this. This is pretty cool. I don't want to be that cool anymore.
That was before social media. It was a cool thing to take a picture of you doing something scary so that people could comment on it and like, oh, you went over the falls in a barrel. Oh, so anyway, let's talk. Speaking of going over the fall in the barrel, I want to go real quick. So I really took a fascination with home repair when I was going into high school. So we had to choose a few high schools in Buffalo. I ended up not going there, but I had applied for McKinley High School because they had the building trades program. And I pictured myself for some time being somebody who would work on building houses and plumbing and all that stuff. And then I said, you know what? No.
Not for me.
Not for me. So I went to a different high school instead. But that was definitely an opportunity. I got that from watching Trading Spaces on TLC.
Yep. Great show.
Great show. They brought it back. I don't know if it's back for good or if there was a few seasons. But then there's a television show that was in Canada called Canada's Worst Handyman.
I have seen it on your recommendation.
And let me tell you, that show, watching people do ridiculous things and then going back and saying, you know what, I'm going to try that project because if they can do it after making the same mistake I probably was going to make, it was great and it works and you learn from that. So
Yes, but I've also watched people who do things like they did on that show, and that's a painful thing to watch.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my goodness gracious, please step aside and allow somebody else to do this for you, because I'm not sure this is going to get any better.
I remember there was this one episode where they in between the two walls they had like that wood stripping that went across.
Mm-hmm.
I guess before they had like the sheetrock that we have
Right,
now.
the
They had
lat board, I think
the
it's
lat
called.
board, yeah, and they had to put a safe into the wall, and that was one of their challenges. So they cut in, and the carpenters, the master carpenters, said 16 inches in between each stud. And of course, this house was built before that, so it wasn't 16 inches. It was like
Right.
20 inches.
Yeah, right.
So they're talking about how they have to cut into it, and they say the first thing you should do is use the stud finder and mark where the studs are, and then you should cut into the wall. Well, this one gentleman decided that was too much for him, so he took a hammer and just started
bashing. Oh my gosh.
Add to the story, he ended up going through his room's wall into his components, his like opponent's wall. So now they had a bigger mess to fix because he didn't take the time to do it. I just thought that was pretty fascinating, and humorous.
And I'm sure that happens a lot.
A lot, yeah. So let's move on to cars. Now, you have an affinity for vehicles.
I love cars.
And you, from the time that I've known you in 3 years, you've had many. Either you've bought them to refurbish them and sell them, you flipped them, you drove them for a little while and said, I want something new. So talk about your fascination with vehicles and what got you there, and how being your own mechanic on some things has proved to be beneficial to you.
I grew up in a neighborhood with pretty much all guys and no girls. So I spent a lot of time with a group of guys through middle school into high school. Tom Leolos, Leo McGorry, Triple Cooper, and these guys would work on their cars and do things, and they would help me out. And they said, it's important as a woman that you understand things, because when you go to a garage to get your car repaired, they're going to tell you things are wrong that aren't wrong, and you need to understand. So I used to spend a lot of time with them in their garages when I was growing up, watching them work on cars. In fact, I remember the first time I came home and I said to my mother, my car, I was in high school, my car needs a front brake job. I'm going to do it, and the seal needs to be replaced. And my mother's like, oh, no. She's like, yeah, that's not going to happen, because I can't have you stepping on the brakes and them not working and you dying. And I was like, no, I can do it. And it took a lot of convincing. And my friend Triple Cooper came over, and he showed me how to do it, and we did it. And we also had a neighbor who worked on cars. He was a car aficionado. I said that word, but you know what I'm talking about. And
aficionado.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you. And so what happened was my dad had Fiat Spiders when we were little kids. Mm-hmm. And I always thought they were pretty amazing, and I loved them. So when I was in college, I bought a used Fiat Spider, and it was fantastic. But at a certain point, I needed more money to pay to go to college. So I sold the car. So I always said to myself, I hope someday I'm able to get another one. Mm-hmm. And then I won't tell you the age, but at a certain age, I'm like, okay, this will be my birthday present to myself. And I picked up a 1976 Fiat Spider from Chicago, and had it shipped here to the house for $1,500. And they told me things worked that didn't work, and it took a long time and a lot of work, but we finally got that up and running and refurbishing. And one of the things that my friend taught me too was an awful lot about how to do interiors of cars. So my mechanics, I know some things, but really where my expertise in cars is refurbishing the interiors. So taking interiors and bringing them back to life and repairing certain things I can do, Mm-hmm. So I did that. And then someone I sold it and bought a new one. And then someone at the University of Buffalo put a note on my car one day and said, "Will you sell me your car?" So I'm like, "Yeah, okay." So, I sold him the car and then went out and bought a 1996 BMW Z3 and started working on refinishing that. And that was a lot of fun because mechanically that car was completely sound, but it was lots of little things like the air conditioner didn't work and the squirters didn't work and the seats needed to be repaired and the dash lights didn't work and the seats shook and the glove compartment was sagging. I mean, but those were things, all right? But those were things that were easy to fix, and you could find the parts on eBay.
It sounds like a lemon law disaster, right?
Yeah. Well, but the fun part about that stuff too is that then you research the background of the car, where the car came from. So pretty much every Z had a sagging glove compartment box because they made this huge, heavy box and just a thin strip of plastic. So you spent $8 on a metal bar that was after factory design. You took the box off, you put the metal bar on, you put it all back together. It looks great. You look like a hero. You spent $8 and you swore a little bit and spent 45 minutes and but it made a huge difference in the way the interior looked. And that's why I could pick up the cars cheap too, because they look at them and they go, well, the seats rock and this is wrong and that's wrong. And that's what makes it so fun, right? Is the hunt on eBay to find the parts or to join the auto club for Fiat and then start building relationships with people. And they're like, I need a 2000 logo for the key in the back, and this is not a fuel injected, and they all say 2000 fuel injected, and I need this and I can't find it anywhere. And then someone messages you, oh, I've got some. If you pay $5 for the shipping, I'll send you the logo. Okay, great, thanks. Nice. And you bring it back to where it used to be. And that's, again, kind of that's the common theme for me. Like, right, you get something and you make it better. Yeah. And then you move on. And that's really what I love to do. I guess that's the theme there for me.
The only thing I know about car restoration or building came from Home Improvement, where Tim Taylor was just working in his garage building a hot rod, and it would be on television. And I think you said something that actually happened in the show a lot, where he would find these parts online, but that was before the internet. I mean, that was like in the 90s, right?
Yes.
So you would have to probably look in magazines or something, I would assume, and write to people and call people.
Probably,
and, know. So that's really cool. So what do you remember the first car you ever owned? What it was, make, model, all that.
Yeah, it was a 1976 Chevy Nova, tan with plaid seats. The springs in the front seats were worn down so that I had to put a cushion. Otherwise, I would have been that lady driving, looking through the steering wheel instead of above it. It didn't have power brakes, so sometimes I had to take both feet to bring that thing to a stop. It had an AM radio. And the big thrill of that was going to Kmart and buying an FM converter. That was like my big claim to fame. I installed an FM converter. So I had that. And then later on, they started making radios that you could buy and install in cars that were cassette decks. And that was a big deal. So yeah, Chevy Nova, that thing was... I mean, it was a great car. It always stalled twice when you put it into gear to drive, but on the third time it would go. And it was a tank.
Yeah,
it was a tank. So yeah, I kept that car for a really long time.
My first car I got when I was a freshman in college, so 2009.
Yeah,
it was a 1988 Ford Escort, baby blue, all original parts. It had 5,500 original miles on it.
That's it.
And the story behind it was that it was one of my mom's friends' brother's mother had this car, and she would have it serviced, but she would have the flatbed come, pick it up, tow it to the shop, have all the stuff done to it, tow it back to the house, put it in the driveway. So
So that's like a brand new car.
it was brand new. And as I had it, it had some rust damage. So what I did, and my mom would help me. I went to Walmart. I got Rust-Oleum. I
Hmm.
sanded down the rust because it was all surface rust,
Surface rust, yeah.
and I would paint a black racing stripe. And it was only on one side of the car. I was like, well, I can't drive around with only one racing stripe. So on the other side,
Yeah.
I painted a black stripe. And it had those automatic seat belts that would choke you when you
Yes.
close
Yes.
the door.
Yeah.
But something it had, first of all, I looked like a giant driving this thing because this car,
it was little.
it was tiny, and to buy it brand new back in '88, it was like $7,500. Like
Yeah.
it was, and then like the Ford Focus took over for
Right.
that model.
Right.
And
Right.
and I just remember getting that car, driving it, and there on the passenger side there was a little tray table above the glove compartment, and you could sit stuff on it. And I was like, that must mean I've made it, that I could sit something down in my car
Yeah.
while I'm driving. 4 years
Yeah. So
later, no, go
4
on.
years later. No, 4 years later. Yeah.
I'm coming home from Rochester one night. It's 11:30. I get to the Clarence rest stop milepost 412. I slam into a deer and total it.
Oh, I can't believe you remember the milepost marker.
I had to because I had to call. I remember this. So I'm at the Clarence rest stop. I call
Right.
the 911. They connect me to the state troopers who say, we're in the area, we're coming. The state trooper pulls up. He's like, is everything okay? I said, yeah. He's like, I just came from where you were. We don't see a body or anything. So the deer must have jumped off.
Right.
He's like, he looks at my car. He looks at me. I'm sobbing. He's like, but I'm going to have to write you a ticket for hunting without a license. And I said,
he was joking, right?
Yeah.
Oh my God, John.
Now in hindsight, I find that hysterical. At the point, I was not very pleased.
Yeah, right. You didn't, yeah. But you said something about the cup holders. That was the other thing that was a big deal, right? You'd go to Kmart and you'd buy the rubber steering wheel wrap that had the holes in it and the boondoggle.
Yeah.
And you'd wrap your steering wheel, and then you'd buy the plastic container that would go on the big hump where the transmission ran to the back, because I don't know if the Focuses were front wheel. I think they were front wheel.
Yep, they were.
Right.
Yeah,
so, but the Novas were rear wheel, so they had this gigantic hump that ran the whole thing. So you put this plastic thing on the hump, and that was your cup holder. And boy, FM converter, boondoggle steering wrap, and my plastic cup holders. I was good to go.
Good to go. Oh my!
And I'm just going to say a funny story about that is that when Madison got her first car, it had crank windows. And she got in the car and she said, how do I open the windows? And I'm like, these cranks here. And I don't want to make fun of my poor daughter, but she had such little arms. It took her 2 hands to crank that window down and up every time. But it's funny because we have cell phones now versus phones on the wall, and we're talking about the humps in the middle of the car that you used to have, and now I don't know if there's any cars that are even made with hand crank windows, right? I mean,
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's crazy. Everything is power now. But yeah, they used to be. I remember too, because we used to have a 4-door, and when I'd have to reach in the back and crank down the window in the back seat when my daughter was hot, I'd crank it, and then I have to crank my God, dislocate your shoulder. Now you just hit a button and it's automatic down and up, and it's all good stuff.
It's just something about it, that takes away. There's those little things, like the comedians are all talking about how cell phones don't allow you to get angry at somebody and slam the receiver down.
That's right. I never thought of that.
It's just like you just press the button. Yeah,
it's not quite the same impact.
Not the same. Or you don't want to talk to somebody and you're going to be dramatic and you just roll that window up real quick. It's like you got that anger. Now it's just like you press a button and it takes away all that
Right.
stuff. But Connie, this was really nice talking with you tonight.
Well, good. Thanks, John. I
And
appreciate it.
I was very happy that you were able to take time out of your busy schedule to speak to me. So thank you very much.
My
And
pleasure. Thank you.
ladies and gentlemen, this is Connie Hanel who spoke with us today. I'm very happy that she was able to come and speak with us. Please, if you liked what you saw today, like and subscribe to Why Bother on Facebook and on YouTube. We'd like to thank this month's sponsor, Krutinger Puppets. And I am happy to announce that Why Bother is now available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, and Anchor. From all of us at Why Bother, which is really just me, thank you for tuning in. And until next time, take care.